A Japanese folk singer has taken the internet by storm. Transcending language gaps around the world. Ichiko Aoba is being called the most peaceful singer in the world, a lighthouse of individuality in a sea of conformity.
This video is brought to you by Nebula, the only place where you can watch my original documentary Danger Music, the true story behind some of the most disgusting, scary, dangerous music ever made. So go to nebula.tv/Volksgeist to watch Danger Music and countless other quality original content. From movies to documentaries, Nebula is the home of the best creators on the internet. More about that later. Ichiko Aoba is one of the most unusual and strange yet interesting artists around today. She's responsible for the beautiful instrumentation and the angelic singing behind masterpiece albums like QP and Windswept at Dawn, while also being one of the most foreign and unusual sounding artists most of us have ever heard. She sings only in Japanese, but her music has reached a world audience who all feel like her songs are written just for us, our lives and our memories, and her music feels especially important in today's world of rapid change that can be so fast many people are left feeling alienated and lost in the noise. Ichiko's music doesn't offer numbing distraction, novelty, sales pitches, or branding disguised as relatability. Ichiko instead connects us to our deepest emotions and innermost thoughts in a way that almost no other artists do today. And in a world where the industry forces artists to calculate every step like we're a data-driven brand instead of people, Ichiko is pure in a strange way. She doesn't have an image or a career crafted by design, but an honest and real life that accidentally became poetry. Because despite Ichiko's significant success in the music industry over the last 5 to 10 years, it turns out she never intended to have a music career at all, or even to write her own music. But the music Ichiko Aoba makes is absolutely beautiful. It's unlike anything else you've ever heard, and you're really not going to understand unless I play you a clip. So let's be clear, Ichiko Aoba isn't a mainstream music artist with big streaming numbers and media buzz, at least not compared to most artists I would ever cover on this channel. So I won't blame you for not knowing much about her, and I would even bet that most of her fans probably know almost nothing about Ichiko's personal life since she's never really done any interviews in English. For this video, I myself and my researcher Neil, we had to dig through Japanese archives and translate them, and as far as we could tell, this is one of the first ever English videos that discusses Ichiko's Japanese interviews. But if I'm trying to introduce Ichiko Aoba at a glance to people who don't know her, there would be two ways to explain why she's so special, one of the most interesting musicians around today. I could point at her achievements and recognition here in the West because she's definitely not lacking any of that. From reviews to press coverage, concert footage, streaming and social media numbers, a few viral clips, Ichiko Aoba isn't a nobody. She's actually achieved the dream career and success for most artists, especially for a Japanese folk artist. She is pretty popular in the Western world. Or instead, I could show you how her music impacts people in a way that streaming numbers can't really convey, in the same way that her music tells countless stories without us being able to understand a single word of it. So how did Ichiko Aoba become such a uniquely powerful artist who touches so many people's hearts? We'll talk about all of this a little later in the video, but for now, let's go back to the early 1990s in Japan. The story, according to Ichiko, is that her early life was defined by an almost never-ending feeling of loneliness and alienation. She talks about drifting from one place to another, searching for belonging, but never quite finding what she was looking for. Beginning when she was a kid, the only place she felt comfortable was a deep and imaginative inner world. During a 2023 interview, her manager said this: "She was kind of quite weak at the time, and music was something that she really needed to carry on to continue existing." She even said that the only books she liked reading as a kid were picture books of animals and plants. She also mentions Studio Ghibli as a major early inspiration. Studio Ghibli, of course, besides making great movies defined by amazing animation and good storytelling, they're also known for their depiction of themes surrounding human connection with nature. And when we listen to the music Ichiko makes now, it seems like the biggest thing she took away from the movies was that connection between humanity and nature. The magical realism we hear in Ichiko's work today, especially on Windswept at Dawn, goes back to her childhood. adulthood. But like I mentioned, Ichiko's early life and journey towards fame was defined also by loneliness and anxiety. She quit piano lessons after just 2 weeks because the instructor was angry that Ichiko only wanted to play according to her sensibilities as opposed to learning the correct formal technique. And while today she's internationally known for her otherworldly singing voice, she even quit the choir club at school because she was fearful of singing by herself and found it more comfortable to make melodies through instruments instead. I think anxious would be a big understatement to describe this stage of Ichiko's life. There were happy words from the teacher, but also cruel words and emotional words were sometimes spoken. I felt there were many instances where such words wouldn't have been said if each student's uniqueness had been truly seen. As adults, we might just feel a sting and shake it off, but for middle school students with their delicate hearts, these things can penetrate deeply. It wasn't just fun every day. Sometimes it was so hard, I felt like I was going to die. But eventually, Ichiko's loneliness did come to an end when she expanded on her passion for playing music by learning how to make it. One day in school, a 17-year-old Ichiko Aoba was gifted a ticket to a concert in Tokyo because her classmate couldn't go. She traveled to Tokyo by herself for the first time. She was confused and timid, but also interested in what she might find there. And she ended up being introduced to the artist who would lay the foundation for her career, a man named Anmi Yamada. Anmi Yamada is a reclusive musician who was described by the Japan Times during a 2016 interview with Ichiko as an artist whose fan base could probably be counted in the double digits. But it didn't matter how popular he was or he wasn't. Ichiko loved his music and she begged him to be her mentor. And you can easily hear how his style influenced her work even to this day. From the gentle, jazzy nylon string guitars to the light, airy singing and the song structures that feel like meandering trails through a forest, Ichiko's respect and admiration for Anmi Yamada's trademark methods is very, very clear. But despite this new life of learning music that she loved, Ichiko wasn't as excited about writing her own music, let alone pursuing a music career. She felt happy just playing the guitar, practicing her songs, and mimicking Yamada's style. It was fun. I was able to play the music played by Mr. Yamada in the same way, and that was enough. But eventually, the time came when Yamada asked, Ichiko, if you can play the guitar like this, why don't you try writing your own songs? And despite being hesitant, she ended up doing it, but only because Yamada was the one who asked. And so the first song she wrote was called The World of the Heart, which was a pretty amazing song for her first ever attempt. At one point down the line, an agent from a Japanese indie record label saw Ichiko playing at a bar, and despite obvious hesitations, Ichiko was convinced to try recording music. One story from the production of this project is about the all-white album cover. The label wanted Ichiko to pose for the album cover, but she didn't want to show herself to so many people she didn't know, and ended up settling on an all-white album cover with no image at all on the front. I didn't want to appear in front of people, so I didn't want to record the first album until just before. The CD jacket was also supposed to have a picture of me, but I firmly refused. In the end, I settled on nothing but a pure white cover. Even though the album was received well and a lot of musicians in the industry admired it, and Ichiko got lots of offers for collaborations and opportunities, she still felt like she was just doing what was asked of her and didn't have a lot of motivation to continue. I've performed with various people after being approached, but when I had just debuted, I only knew the songs of Anmi Yamada, whom I consider my mentor, and the songs he recommended. I had no interest in the music industry at all. That being said, this album does include some of my favorite songs Ichiko has ever made, like the elegant intro Furin, which you'll hear right now. It's pretty poetic how Anmi Yamada himself was an obscure musician who didn't achieve much in terms of fame, but he was able to nurture and shape a lost and timid young artist into someone who grew into exceptional success. After Razor Girl, her next two albums had a similar minimal musical style. Her fourth album, Zero, was the first one released under a major label. It was her breakthrough record in Japan, and it gave Ichiko a much bigger profile. And in terms of sound, it feels a lot like a more mature version of what she had done before, still based in soft acoustic guitar and even softer dreamlike vocals, unlike almost anything you'll ever hear, with an added layer of ambiance, and she's continued building on that formula ever since with some really special albums, writing, singing, and producing some of my favorite records of all time. Mahoro Boshiya, Ichiko's Ichiko's fifth album from 2016 is a loose combination of the words destruction and illusion, and it kind of tells the story of Ichiko trying to cast aside the veil or illusion that covered her identity in her past works, not only as an artist but also as a person. This album features some of her best songs, and to me it proved for the first time that she could be one of the greatest musicians alive. Her guitar playing and singing is simple, but in the simplicity, there's a realness that other artists don't have. The atmosphere is incredibly, deeply calming. I didn't even know I needed music like this until I heard it for the first time, and a wave of feelings I've never felt before washed over me. There are songs like The End, where she creates a choral effect by layering her own voice. Or the title track that uses the space she recorded in to create a different soundscape from the rest of the songs. Much larger space creates a transcendent sound as opposed to the intimate acoustic jazzy guitar, despite no differences in the composition itself. While it might be hard to internalize the individual tracks at first, not understanding Japanese, they feel more and more powerful each time you listen, for the simple fact that no matter what, Ichiko Aoba always chooses beauty and peace in everything she makes, in a world where almost no other artists do that at all. 2018's QP is another album that really showcases an amazing evolution with some of the most simply comforting music I've ever heard. But there's now a sixth Ichiko album that's completely different from the rest of her work, and it made her more globally popular than ever before, with a new sound unlike anything else being made in the music industry today. But before getting into the story behind Ichiko's masterpiece, let's understand what makes her have such a powerful effect on listeners, especially in the digital era of TikTok sounds, algorithms, dopamine music, and gimmicks. So what is her approach to art? What's her philosophy for living a life that manifests this type of music? How did a scared teenager become a legendary folk singer? When asked about her creative process, Ichiko has said that most of her songs are written from her dreams. She's talked about not reading much and not watching many movies. Instead, her many dreams and out-of-body experiences inspire her work. Her best music is made when she's in a half-dreamy state between being asleep and awake, because things seem too real for inspiration when she's awake. When she was asked what the most important part of her creative process was, she responds with the very first image, like an instinct. She describes this in the context of her singing in this 2021 Reddit interview. Do you purposefully try to make your music overcome the language barrier? And her answer was, I do write lyrics, but the times that I improvise with the sounds that come to me, that's when I feel most free. Pilgrimage is a song I sung from words I improvised. These aren't the structured arpeggios of an opera singer or the silky vocal riffs of R&B. Instead, Ichiko articulates melodies like the sound of nature, like the sound of birds or whales, or the untaught giggles and exclamations of a child. You find these in Asleep Among the Endives, Space Orphans, and her many other songs. Combined with her melodies that capture an honest and free-flowing emotionality, you get singing that cuts through linguistic and cultural barriers, like the elementary yet powerful emotion of crying, yelling, or laughing. There's a story being told without words or sentences, and that's not just my perspective as an English speaker. Many of her songs, including some of her most popular tracks, feature lyrics that at first glance could be confused for a foreign language, but are in fact just Ichiko humming and ad-libbing melodically. On the most streamed song from Windswept at Dawn, it's really noticeable. While we hear the faint sounds of kids playing and birds chirping, Ichiko does nothing more than sing soft, non-verbal melodies on top of delicate piano. Horo from the same album is an even better example, where her vocals may sound lyrical at first, but quickly turn out to be closer to the aimless and ghostly sound of a distant whale song than anything else. This approach stands in stark contrast to today's state of informational overload and entertainment. We're always being bombarded with content, news, and ideas all the time. It feels like sometimes a lot of us are at our loneliest but still never alone with our thoughts. No one has the time or energy to know what we truly think, how we truly feel, or even be in touch with ourselves and know who we are as people. I think, however, Ichiko's approach is the act of living an honest life, experiencing things deeply and then processing it through dreams and instincts, creating a safe space for us to think. In her art and in her life, Ichiko focuses on pure human essence, trying to understand the happiness people experience from eating a good meal or laying on the grass during a sunny, breezy day. The goal is to make art that even people 300 years from now could experience and understand profoundly. Ichiko described this interest when she spoke about collaborating with Japanese musician Hiromi Hosono from YMO. Instead of focusing on his career or his profile, she said, "I was interested in finding out what this Hosono guy had eaten that day. What does he have in his belly that makes his voice sound that way?" she said. "There are lots of great artists, but I want to know about the little things that make them people. I've always been interested in the steps involved." And then later, the interviewer asked her if there were anyone she could collaborate with in the world, who would it be? Ichiko's answer was children. Not because she literally wanted to make music with a child, but because she could learn much more from their mindset than she could from anybody else. And while this also might seem odd to us, I think that may be because we're too far gone inside the matrix of consumeristic life. I think it serves as an important reminder of what music is, what art is, at its most very fundamental level. The human experience expressed at its emotive and subjective best. Ichiko doesn't really seem to think about what would be artistically impressive or what would grab attention or what would make sales. Her work is an honest exploration of herself. This kind of honesty goes beyond just talking about vulnerabilities or troubles. Instead, she's looking inward without being self-centered. Even her Japanese lyrics are often vague at best, with peaceful imagery of nature instead of just talking about feelings, thoughts, and events. The song Easter Lily is a great example of this. While the song might make us feel pensive, thoughtful, or nostalgic, the lyrics translated to English are nothing more than a song about nature. She's singing about mountains, stars, wind, and the sounds of frogs echoing against the forest trees. And like I mentioned earlier, many of her vocals don't contain any lyrics at all. In a world where everyone is trying to sell us something, products, dreams, ideologies, Ichiko doesn't. It's human connection at its purest. In nature and in society, the most profound truths are often conveyed non-verbally. I can only be me and you for a very limited time. After 300 years, no one will be alive, and at that time, everyone may be the same raindrops. Individual is important, but if you respect the individual too much, it becomes, I am like this, but you are different, she said. And if you go too far, it can even lead to discrimination. I want to make something where such things crumble away and you don't feel the boundary. And so I think Ichiko's music has a similar effect on the listener as being in nature. Even though we might not understand her lyrics, we still feel a deep emotional resonance at a fundamentally human level. We may not comprehend all the scientific details and the properties of everything in nature, but that doesn't hinder our sense of connection to it. All we need to feel that connection is to be alive. Even Ichiko's concerts are like a journey into nature. She creates dreamy atmospheres where the audience seems to feel transported to another world. She often uses dim lighting in the concert hall, performing in almost complete darkness. Nature sounds in her songs, like the chirps of a bird, like you can hear in this version of Space Orphans, or even a few years ago, she did a rock concert where she stood on business and did an entire show sitting on top of a giant boulder in the middle of a forest. In 2020, 10 years since being the lonely girl who had to be pushed into believing in herself enough to make an album, the 30-year-old Ichiko Aoba finished what she called her first ever self-motivated record, while the rest of the world called it a masterpiece, and it introduced her to a completely new audience overseas in the West. In my mind, it's one of the best albums of the decade so far. A completely unique piece of music that represents Ichiko chasing and achieving her highest potential in a completely new way. Windswept at Dawn is the first ever with a colorful picture, and that too, of Ichiko swimming through clear water with an Adon fruit in her hands. It's a far cry from that day back in 2010 when she was so afraid of appearing in front of people that she refused to pose for her album cover. In January of 2020, Ichiko was on the Japanese island of Okinawa. She spent every day alone with her thoughts, staring blankly at the ships from the port or roaming around on the beach, and it was there that she saw the Adon tree that inspired her next era. The Adon tree is known for its ability to grow in harsh environments and withstand strong winds and the salty soil. The Adon tree is often a symbol of resilience and adaptation in the face of challenges. Ichiko saw her own life reflected in this tiny piece of nature, and she was inspired to create an album around that very idea. And with that, Windswept Adan was born. The plot is set on a pair of fictional islands, one of which is haunted by a tribe of inbred families who don't use words to speak, but instead communicate by giving each other seashells, and another island which is filled with nothing but natural life. At the center of the story is a young girl from the tribe who's sent away by her grandmother in the hope of preserving their bloodline while escaping the nasty cycles. And the island the young girl is sent to is called Adan. The story plot begins, there were no words on that island. Ichiko added a variety of new production techniques like ambient sounds recorded on location at the island she visited near Okinawa. The record also combines the traditional Japanese folk sounds Ichiko is known for with orchestral arrangements and electronic textures without getting rid of her signature lullaby-style vocals and delicate guitar playing. On the song Porcelain, we hear bells, woodwinds, shimmering cymbals, a xylophone, deep bass, all creating beautiful waves of sound with a violin in the second half of the song. This is one of those songs that Ichiko has said was most inspired by her visit to the Kerama Islands. And the track Perfume de Toilette features soft piano that sounds even more comfortable and real. You can even hear the piano pedals and the sounds of kids playing, while Ichiko sings like she's vocalizing and whistling from another room. At the same time, the track Dawn in the Adan again combines multiple musical elements like a flute, plucked strings, and aquatic ambiance. The closing track is 6 minutes long and is my personal favorite Ichiko Aoba song. There's a beautiful texture in the strings as Ichiko's voice harmonizes almost mournfully with the rising swell of strings before it all crashes into a field recording of calm ocean waves breaking on the shore as the album comes to an end. Overall, Windswept Adan is one of the most fascinating albums of the last 5 years with a unique sound that blends Japanese folk with deep, wide orchestral beauty, telling a story about finding peace in a cold world. If you asked Ichiko Aoba about her motivation for making music when she was young, she would say it was a way to escape the pain of reality. In 2022, an interviewer asked her the same question again. This time, her answer was the opposite. Music is a way to celebrate the surprise and joy of being alive. There was no more to add. Her past self wouldn't have understood, but things were different now, much clearer. Music had stopped being an escape from reality. It was more now. It became a means to serve life. And Ichiko has followed that feeling to an incredible level of respect as an artist and a musician, making some of the best and most interesting albums of the last 10 years. Ultimately, what Ichiko Aoba teaches us is that art shouldn't be a drug. It's not about running from a harsh life and an unconcerned world. It's about diving into the world and exploring everything it has to offer. Sure, at first it might be cold and you might be scared or shocked, but there's so much to see and feel if you don't give up. The life and music of Ichiko Aoba is more than enough to prove that point. And an artist like Ichiko Aoba makes me realize that if I want to truly enjoy art and get something out of it, I should never stop looking for these more honest and true experiences from what I watch and listen to. If we want more, we have to look for more. And I get what Ichiko was struggling with. There have been many times I feel like I don't even choose what topics to cover on my channel because the algorithm, the pressure to be prolific, it's much stronger than the pressure to be creative. Even this video was risky to make because Ichiko might have a fascinating story, but she's not very well known on social media, and recognizability online can be a lot more important than good storytelling. In a lot of ways, fitting into the algorithm can sometimes be the only way to get noticed. One project that I struggled to make for YouTube was Danger Music. It's a documentary I made about the history of violent music, with all the raw footage included, talking about bands that committed murder, burned down buildings, performers that hurt the audience or destroyed the venue, or even threw shit at their fans as part of the show. I think it might ultimately be obvious why Danger Music isn't on YouTube because it's just not a YouTube video. This is danger music we're talking about. Music so violent, so deadly that you can hardly even talk about it on YouTube. But we're not on YouTube, so I'm gonna say whatever I want. The idea of music that could potentially... Danger Music is actually a Nebula original. It's funded by and exclusively available on Nebula because of their mission to be the best place for creators to make work that we couldn't make anywhere else. They gave me the resources to make the best documentary I possibly could, and I think it turned out really great. Nebula is a platform I co-founded with other creators as a place where we can elevate ourselves to to a level above what we were previously capable of by coming together to create our own platform, and is quickly becoming one of the most interesting, fastest growing independent video platforms on the internet. Nebula has produced exclusives like Lindsay Ellis's Ballad of John and Yoko, which dives deep into the unintended consequences of the murder of John Lennon. It's a beautiful video exploring one of the strangest stories in modern music history. They also have really interesting shows like the in-depth geopolitics show Modern Conflicts, or Jet Lag, which is a travel game show where the players use the real world as their sandbox. It's a unique concept which is so exciting, and it wouldn't be possible without Nebula. We're even producing a full-length movie called Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend that got covered in Variety, one of the most popular entertainment magazines in the world. So Nebula is becoming the answer to the question, how do you make art and content that's just as high quality and interesting as traditional media without the corruption and exploitation associated with that industry? I've always wanted to take my videos to the next level, and Nebula is enabling that for our entire list of creators. Better stories, better production value, taking creators to the next level, that's what Nebula is all about, and there are countless examples of what we're capable of, and it's only getting better as time goes on. Algorithm, clickbait, ads, none of that. So if you want to join a platform that's pushing entertainment forward, enabling us to make things that we've never been able to make before, you can get access to exclusives like My Danger music documentary, or high-quality, thoughtful videos from hundreds of other creators like Adam Neely, Todd in the Shadows, Polyphonic, FD Signifier, Bobby Broccoli, countless amazing storytellers. All of that to say, I really think all of you should check out Nebula today. Go watch my show Danger Music, or Jet Lag, or The Ballad of John and Yoko by going to nebula.tv/Volksgeist and getting 40% off, because Nebula is only $30 a year when you use my code. Not only is it the most interesting video platform anywhere, it's also affordable. I even have a Nebula class breaking down my entire video production process from writing to graphics, which I think a lot of you would enjoy as well. It's not just any project, it's my project, and it's a project you don't want to miss out on. So that's nebula.tv/Volksgeist to get a year of Nebula for just $30 or $2.50 a month.